Welcome to Discovering Orthodox Christianity. I'm Stacy Spanos, your host for this series of talk shows designed to introduce and explain the basic teachings of Orthodox Christianity. We're grateful for the generous offering of funding from the Archbishop Iakovos Leadership 100 Endowment Fund, which has recognized the importance of religious education to Greek Orthodox Christians and to all people.
Oftentimes we think of Jesus as the center of the church, the one who founded the church. We think of him as the one to whom we commit our lives. At the service of baptism, we often say we're renouncing evil, we're committing ourselves to Christ. In the liturgy, we often say we are committing ourselves, one another, and our whole life to Christ.
How important is the Old Testament to us as Orthodox Christians?
Following what the apostles and the fathers have taught, I would say it's of critical importance because the New Testament is written out of the raw material of the Old Testament. And the gospel stories of Jesus are precisely in understanding Jesus on the basis of the Old Testament.
What is a sacrament?
A sacrament is the sacred rites of the church, these sacred services by which the church draws us into the life of Christ, into his saving ministry, in order to convey and transmit to the recipient the gifts of salvation and redemption.
There is no one style for icons. The ones here in this church are, on the whole, beautiful evocations of the Middle Byzantine style. So the Virgin and Child and the apse are what you would see in churches around 1000, but they're Cretan icons in the Greek tradition, they're modern icons, they're Russian icons in a variety of styles, Bulgarian ones. To think that there is only one style is to not understand that these are a tradition that evolves. It's not a stagnant tradition.
So this is called the Easton, and it's a note that is constantly being hummed by some members of a choir, while the rest sing the melody. So we have the melodists and the Isokrates, the ones who hold the Easton. This Easton is the most important, so to speak, note of the mode in which a piece is sung.
Why is that the most important? It's the most monotone.
Right, but it's the one that the piece will eventually end on.
Okay.
The deacon carries those prayers to the holy altar, to the throne of God, right? And then he goes in, and then he comes and appears again at the royal doors pronouncing, "Let us pray to the Lord," and then turns back, comes back. So there's this constant flow of, what the people are bringing before the throne of God, and then through the hands of the priest and the deacon, they bring it back to the people. And, and that's why we ultimately end up with what? Before we offer the gifts, say, "Thine own of thine own." We are giving you what you have given us.
You also often hear the term house of God. Do we have a responsibility to keep faithful to that term? Is this a house of God?
We say this is the place where God dwells, where we interact with God most directly. Yeah, I can step outside in the courtyard here and interact with God in prayer and things like that. But it's here where it's more concentrated in some way, more focused, and trying to draw me in more intentionally than when I'm walking down the hill and admiring the trees and the flowers. And I can look at those trees and flowers and say, what a wonderful God we have who gave us these things. But yeah, it's the house of God.
I would say that the church's response to how you become a saint, or should you become a saint, is actually very simple. It's obey the commandments. And that's all that's actually asked of you. You are to love your God with all your might, all your mind, your heart, your soul. And you are to love your neighbor as yourself. And perhaps in addition to this, to deny yourself and take up the cross of Christ and follow Christ.
The Patriarchate did not try to change the language, the culture, or the religion of the people that were under the empire. They did the evangelization in a very delicate, very sensitive, very careful way, not to hurt anything that has to do with local traditions, ethnicities, or cultural origins.
But even, you know, the epistles of St. Paul, which are heavily theological, every epistle starts out with a theological discussion, but it always moves into ethics. Knowing this about God, knowing this about Christ, Paul then turns to ask, and how should we then treat each other in the church? So the ethics are throughout the scriptures.
Give us some examples of how we should be leading ethical lives that are delineated in the Bible.
Well, the Lord himself, when asked about ethics, gave the basic answer. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the outworking of those two kinds of loves involves more specific things, like for my neighbor, the important thing is doing unto others as I would have them do unto me. And if people just followed that one golden rule, what a wonderful world it would be. But that means having a certain mindfulness in every interaction to think about what is it that that other person needs from me, and how can I respond to that need in an appropriate way.
One thing we have to think about as a parish is, if our parish just disappeared, would anybody notice in the community? So we have to make an imprint. We have to make an impression on our little society and our little community. And if every parish does that, then we fortify each other and we establish strong metropolises and a strong archdiocese.
Absolutely.
I would tell you that the greatest, I think, difficulty for the person in this position seeking an assisted suicide is the idea that in their minds they are, life is not worthwhile, life has become meaningless. And sometimes it's because they don't recognize that God is with them. God is there. And he hears them, and he holds them, and he loves them. And that's the job of the pastor. That's the job of the priest. That's the job of the family community, to come in and hold and love that person.
My husband was not Greek and was not Orthodox, but he did convert. And I remember him talking to our priest at the time, and he was telling him, I want to convert for Stacy. And our priest said, no, you don't want to convert for Stacy, you want to convert for you. Do you run into that attitude as well, and do you direct people into a different path?
I haven't so much. I think whenever they've, I think they do it for the right reasons. I haven't been a parish priest, so those instances aren't very many in my life, but the few that I have encountered, it was more of belonging, coming to church with the spouse, having the children baptized, and all of a sudden after 1 or 2 years saying, you know what, this is home, I belong here. So it's for myself that I convert.
Sometimes the single people still feel a little bit stigmatized too,
they do.
And they feel like third wheels sometimes. That's one of the challenges of the church, to embrace them, to love them, to let them know that they are welcome and that they're part of the community, rather than stigmatizing them and thinking of them as somehow less complete because they're single parents.
What do you find is the #1 challenge when it comes to trying to get children more integrated into the church?
I think one of the things that I see parents and youth workers struggle with is being that source of inspiration. When I was in high school, my high school choir director always used to say, in order to get us to perform at 100%, she had to do things at 200%. She had to have that enthusiasm. And so I think one of the challenges is having that enthusiasm and being integrated into the life of the church so that we inspire our young people to do the same.
In terms of how the church sees the elderly, I think we can say that we understand them as a treasure chest of wisdom. And full of experiences. And I'm reminded of a passage from the book of Job where God reminds Job that wisdom lies with the elderly, with age, and that understanding comes in time. And so we can say that our elderly, the older folks, are necessary. We need them. They're part of who we are. And the church wants to take care of them the best way we can. And if you think about how Christ takes care of his mother while he's on the cross, the Panagia at that time is much older. He doesn't abandon her, but he makes sure that someone is going to take care of her, and he offers her to St. John the Evangelist.
May I ask Your Eminence about baptism? Because I know some people who want to be confirmed in the faith of the Orthodox tradition, if they have already been baptized in their denomination, they do not need to be rebaptized. Is that correct?
That's right. It is the strict policy of the Ecumenical Patriarchate not to rebaptize anyone that was baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, you have to check that. There are some denominations that they'll give you a baptismal certificate that you're baptized in the name of the Holy Trinity, but we found that the definition of Holy Trinity for us is different sometimes than the definition given by that Protestant sect somewhere in the middle of Kansas. But if you're baptized in the name of the Holy Trinity, you are confirmed into the Orthodox Church. You are not rebaptized.
I think that beauty is prevalent in any medium that we have. And I think that part of the responsibility and the role of the church is to take the different mediums that are introduced and to try to sanctify that space, to bring the message of the gospel. Oftentimes it's called the new evangelism.
Yeah, I think I first saw that most obviously in a pop cultural movie in Spider-Man 2. I mean, it was just in your face that, you know, here Spider-Man is trying to save these people who are on a runaway elevated train. And so Spider-Man jumps in front of the train, anchors himself to the buildings by shooting his web out, okay? And he's saving people in this posture, and then he collapses, apparently dead from the effort. And then they bring him in to the train, and they say, he was one of us. He's just a beautiful young boy.
Let's make, among the many slogans that we hear today, bad or good, let's keep as the highest absolute slogan, God is love. And if God is love, let's love one another.